The lunchtime rush at McDonald's. But these days, the cost of burgers and fries is forcing some diners to watch their wallets.
It's too expensive. I don't even buy it, I just buy coffee.
2.5 million. That's how many Canadians walk through a McDonald's door or pull up to a drive-through window to grab a meal every single day. To put that in perspective, that's more than Manitoba's current population, ordering fries, wrapping their hands around a Big Mac, or unwrapping a Happy Meal for a kid in the back seat every single day. With grocery prices surging and paychecks stretched thin, fast food is quietly becoming a survival strategy for many families. Dinner at McDonald's now feels cheaper, or at least easier, than filling a grocery cart. But here's what McDonald's Canada is hiding from you. The food you're eating in Canada isn't the same food they're serving in Europe. The ingredients are different, the standards are different, and the reasons why will make your blood boil. You need to watch this. Same menu, different ingredients. Why Canada gets the worst version. Investigators comparing McDonald's menus across countries discovered something that should make every Canadian pause before ordering their next meal. The ingredients used in Canadian McDonald's products often include additives that simply don't appear in European versions of the exact same items. I'm going to give you an exercise. Pull up the ingredient list for Chicken McNuggets in Canada. You'll find dimethylpolysaloxane, an anti-foaming agent that is, chemically speaking, the same silicone compound used in silly putty. You'll find TBHQ, tertiary butyl hydroquinone, a petroleum-derived preservative, and you'll find multiple sodium phosphates, industrial salts used to bind texture and extend shelf life. These aren't trace amounts buried at the bottom of a long list. They're functional ingredients doing a specific job in your food. Now pull up the UK version of the same McNugget. Rapeseed oil, wheat flour, spices. That's it. No TBHQ, no dimethylpolysaloxane, no sodium phosphates. Just ingredients you could plausibly find in a home kitchen. The difference isn't subtle. It's a completely different formulation philosophy. And it raises a question that should genuinely unsettle every Canadian parent reading this. Why do British children get the cleaner version and ours don't? The answer isn't that these ingredients are secretly dangerous in the amounts used. Health Canada has approved all of them. They fall within regulated limits. McDonald's Canada isn't breaking a single law, but that framing, it's legal, so it's fine, is exactly the kind of corporate deflection that deserves to be interrogated rather than accepted. Because here's what the evidence actually shows. The European Union operates under something called the precautionary principle. When evaluating food additives, European regulators ask, is this ingredient necessary? If a cleaner alternative exists and the additive isn't essential, it doesn't make the cut. Canada's regulatory framework, governed by Health Canada, asks a fundamentally different question. Is this ingredient safe within defined limits? Both approaches are scientific, both are legitimate policy positions, but they produce dramatically different food systems. And Canadians are eating the difference every single day. When McDonald's formulates for the EU market, they remove TBHQ and dimethylpolysaloxane because regulators won't allow the shortcuts. When they formulate for Canada, those ingredients stay in, not because they're necessary for flavor or safety, but because Canadian regulations don't force their removal, and synthetic preservatives are cheaper than the alternatives. Let that land for a second. McDonald's already knows how to make a cleaner McNugget. They make it every day, just not for us. This isn't a supply issue. It isn't a logistics challenge. It's a regulatory arbitrage decision made in a boardroom somewhere. And the result is that Canadians are consuming petroleum-derived preservatives that European consumers haven't seen in their McNuggets in years. According to the European Food Safety Authority, TBHQ has faced repeated scrutiny in the EU over concerns about its effects at higher exposure levels, particularly in children, which is precisely why reformulation pressure exists there and not here. The deeper issue is what this ingredient gap reveals about the relationship between Canada's food regulators and the corporations they're meant to oversee. When the law sets the floor, and corporations are free to operate anywhere above it, the floor becomes the standard. There's no market incentive to go higher unless consumers demand it loudly enough, or regulators require it. In Canada, neither has happened with enough force to move the needle. So the McNugget stays the same, the silly putty compound stays in, and 2.5 million Canadians keep eating it, most of them completely unaware that a cleaner version of the same product exists, being sold under the same golden arches, just not on this side of the Atlantic. And if the ingredient gap bothers you, Wait until you see what a single McDonald's meal does to your sodium intake for the day. The numbers are genuinely shocking, and they affect millions of Canadian meals before noon. Sodium overload. One meal equals more than half your daily limit? Most Canadians think about sodium the way they think about their car's check engine light. They know it matters. They just don't think it applies to them right now. But here's a number that should make you put down whatever you're eating and pay full attention. 1,325 milligrams. That's the sodium load in a standard McDonald's Canada meal. 1 Big Mac, 1 medium fries, 1 medium Coke, 1 sitting, 1 lunch break, 1 tired Tuesday evening when nobody felt like cooking. Health Canada recommends adults consume no more than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. That single McDonald's meal, before you've eaten breakfast or dinner, already consumes 58% of your entire daily limit. And that guideline was designed for occasional indulgence, not the 2 to 3 times per week that Canadians now average at fast food restaurants. Break it down and the picture gets worse. The Big Mac alone carries 970 milligrams of sodium. The medium fries add another 340 milligrams. Even the Coke chips in 15 milligrams. None of these numbers are hidden. McDonald's publishes them because they're legally required to. But there's a significant gap between information being available and information being understood in the context of a rushed lunch or a hungry family at a drive-through window. Here's what makes this particularly interesting when you compare it to other markets. A Big Mac in the UK contains approximately 900 milligrams of sodium. Medium fries in France clock in around 310 milligrams. The differences sound minor in isolation. 70 milligrams here, 30 milligrams there. But multiply those differences across millions of meals served daily, across months and years of routine consumption, and you're looking at a measurable population-level health gap, driven entirely by recipe choices. McDonald's is making market by market, and those choices aren't random. McDonald's adjusts sodium levels by country for 3 specific reasons, and none of them are about your health. First, regulatory pressure. The EU has mandatory sodium reduction targets that food companies must meet or face consequences. Second, consumer activism. The UK endured years of sustained public health campaigns, specifically targeting salt levels in fast food, forcing chains to respond or lose customers. Third, competitive dynamics. European fast food chains actively compete on health metrics in a way Canadian chains simply don't. In Canada, far less public pressure, no mandatory sodium reduction targets, no nationally coordinated campaign forcing McDonald's hand. So the recipes haven't changed. The sodium stays elevated, and the health costs accumulate quietly in the background. What most people don't realize is that sodium in fast food isn't just about taste. It serves industrial functions. Higher sodium formulations are easier to mass produce, simpler to ship across a country as geographically vast as Canada, and more consistent when reheated at scale. Reducing sodium isn't just a recipe tweak. It requires reformulation, retesting, and investment. McDonald's will make that investment when they're required to. In Canada, they haven't been required to, so they haven't. The long-term consequences of this are not abstract. According to Heart and Stroke Canada, high sodium intake is directly linked to elevated blood pressure, which is the leading risk factor for heart disease and stroke, the number 1 and 3rd leading causes of death in Canada respectively. Regular overconsumption doesn't announce itself with a dramatic health event. It compounds quietly over years, raising blood pressure incrementally, straining cardiovascular systems that are already under stress from economic pressure, sleep deprivation, and sedentary work. When 2.5 million Canadians are eating this food daily, many of them not as an occasional indulgence, but as a budget-driven staple, the sodium gap between Canadian and European formulations stops being a regulatory footnote and starts being a public health issue. And the tragedy is that McDonald's already knows how to make the lower sodium version. They make it every day, in France, in the UK, across the EU. They just don't make it here. The sodium numbers are alarming on their own. But what happens when you combine those health costs with a deliberate pricing strategy designed to push struggling Canadian families toward the cheapest, most processed items on the menu? That's where this story takes a turn that should genuinely make you furious. Inflation greed. How McDonald's value menu is designed for struggling families. Let's be honest about something most Canadians feel, but haven't quite been able to name. There's a specific kind of relief that hits when you pull into a McDonald's during a rough week, when the grocery bill already broke the budget, when payday is 3 days away, when the kids are hungry and you're exhausted. The value menu feels like a lifeline. A McDouble for $3.49. A junior chicken for $2.99. Something hot, something filling, something that doesn't require you to do math you can't afford to lose. It feels like McDonald's is on your side. They're not. What looks like corporate generosity during Canada's worst cost of living crisis in a generation is actually one of the most calculated pricing strategies in the fast food industry. And once you see the architecture of it, you can't unsee it. Here's what the data actually shows. Between 2019 and 2024, McDonald's Canada executed a two-track pricing strategy that was almost elegant in its cynicism. On one track, value menu items either held their price or dropped slightly. The McDouble stayed around $3.49. The junior chicken barely moved. These are the items that get advertised, the ones that show up in app deals and combo bundles, the ones that make McDonald's look like they're absorbing inflation on your behalf. On the other track, the one they don't advertise, standard menu items went through the roof. According to pricing data tracked by Canadian food analysts, a Big Mac meal increased by approximately 35% between 2019 and 2024. A Quarter Pounder meal climbed by roughly 33%. The $10 combo that used to be a normal Tuesday lunch quietly became a $14 or $15 proposition. And if you weren't paying close attention, if you were just grabbing something fast and feeding your family, you might not have noticed until the total at the till made you flinch. Families under financial pressure get funneled toward the value menu. And the value menu, by design, delivers more sodium, more processed fillers, less protein, and smaller portions than the premium items. A Big Mac contains 25 grams of protein. A McDouble, which costs roughly half as much, contains 22 grams. Not a massive protein difference, but the McDouble achieves that number with more sodium, more fillers, and a smaller overall portion. You're not getting a bargain. You're getting a carefully engineered illusion of one. According to Statistics Canada's 2023 Canadian Community Health Survey, food insecurity affected approximately 22.9% of Canadian households in 2022 to 2023, nearly 1 in 4 families. These are the households most likely to be making decisions at the McDonald's value menu. These are the families being handed the highest sodium, most heavily processed, least nutritionally dense options on the menu, and being made to feel grateful for the privilege. Meanwhile, Canadian food bank usage hit a record 2 million visits per month in 2024, according to Food Banks Canada. 2 million Canadians a month relying on food banks is not a backdrop statistic. It is the context inside which McDonald's value menu strategy operates. When people are choosing between the food bank and the drive-thru, affordable fast food isn't competing with restaurant dining. It's competing with hunger. And McDonald's knows this. Their entire location and pricing model is built around this knowledge. The value menu expands precisely when Canadian families are most financially vulnerable, not out of compassion, but because financial vulnerability creates volume. Struggling families buy more frequently, in higher quantities, from the cheaper end of the menu. That's not charity. That's a revenue model. The cruelest part of this equation is the long-game health cost hidden inside the short-term savings. A family of 4 spending $23 on a McDonald's value meal tonight saves money compared to a $45 combo order. But the cumulative sodium load, the processed ingredients, the nutritional gaps, those costs don't show up on tonight's receipt. They show up years later, in doctors' offices, in prescription costs, in the chronic disease burden that disproportionately hits lower-income Canadians who've spent years eating the cheapest calories available because the alternative was eating nothing. The cheapest calories always win in a crisis. McDonald's built an empire on that truth, and they've spent decades making sure the regulations, the pricing architecture, and the menu design keep it that way. The value menu strategy is cynical enough on its own, but in Quebec, McDonald's found a way to extend that same calculated thinking directly to children. And they did it by exploiting a legal loophole in one of the strongest child advertising laws in North America. What they pulled off is genuinely audacious. Quebec did something remarkable in 1980 that most Canadians outside the province don't know about. They banned advertising to children under 13. Completely. one of the strictest child advertising laws in North America, enshrined in the Quebec Consumer Protection Act, Section 248. No cartoon characters, no toy promotions, no direct appeals to children in any commercial media. The intent was clear, and the principle was sound. Children lack the cognitive development to critically evaluate advertising, and targeting them is a form of manipulation that a just society shouldn't permit. For over 4 decades, that law has stood. And for over 4 decades, McDonald's Canada has been operating in Quebec, selling Happy Meals by the millions, with their toys and bright colors and child-friendly packaging completely intact. So how exactly does that work? Outside Quebec, the McDonald's Canada advertising playbook is exactly what you'd expect. Television ads feature toys displayed prominently, playground imagery, bright primary colors, characters and mascots designed to light up a 6-year-old's brain like a pinball machine. The entire creative strategy is engineered to make a child turn to a parent and beg, if necessary, to go to McDonald's. That's not marketing. That's psychological targeting of people who don't yet have the neurological equipment to resist it. Inside Quebec, the TV ads look different. Adults are centered. The messaging emphasizes family meals rather than children's experiences. Toys appear subtly, if at all. No cartoon mascots, no direct appeals to children. On paper, full compliance with the Consumer Protection Act. But here's the loophole that should make every Quebec parent's jaw tighten. The toys are still there. McDonald's complies with the letter of Quebec's law, while systematically circumventing its purpose. And they do it with a marketing budget that makes the whole operation even harder to stomach. McDonald's Canada spent an estimated $20 million plus on advertising in 2023. A significant portion of that targets families with children. For Quebec specifically, the strategy shifted. Marketing dollars moved from restricted media channels into in-store experiences, national campaigns that bleed across provincial borders, and digital platforms using age-gated targeting that keeps the content technically compliant while still reaching Quebec families through national feeds. But why does this matter beyond the cleverness of the workaround? Because the reason Quebec passed that law in the first place was rooted in a fundamental understanding of child psychology, specifically that children under 13 lack the cognitive development to critically evaluate advertising. They cannot distinguish between a genuine recommendation and a commercial appeal. They don't understand that Ronald McDonald isn't their friend. He's a revenue-generating character designed by a corporation to create brand loyalty before a child is old enough to make an independent food choice. Research published by the Canadian Pediatric Society has consistently shown that early brand exposure shapes long-term consumption preferences. Children who develop positive emotional associations with a brand before age 13 carry those associations into adulthood. McDonald's isn't just selling a Happy Meal to a 6-year-old in Montreal. They're cultivating a customer for the next 50 years. Quebec's law tried to interrupt that pipeline. McDonald's found the gap in the fence and walked right through it, legally, deliberately, and with a $20 million budget to make sure it worked. The rest of Canada, meanwhile, has no equivalent law. Children outside Quebec are exposed to the full force of McDonald's child-directed advertising with no legislative protection whatsoever. And Health Canada has no national framework restricting fast food advertising to children, despite repeated calls from public health advocates to implement one. The gap between Quebec's ambition and the national reality is vast, and McDonald's operates profitably in that gap every single day. If the marketing loophole feels like a betrayal of Canadian families, the next revelation hits even closer to home, because it's about the beef McDonald's tells you to feel good about. The 100% Canadian label that supposedly sounds like a promise, and what it actually guarantees. The hidden supply chain. 100% Canadian beef sounds great, until you look closer. 100% Canadian beef. It's one of the most reassuring phrases in McDonald's Canada's marketing arsenal. It conjures something specific in the Canadian imagination. Prairie farms, open rangeland, family operations stretching back generations. A supply chain you can feel good about supporting. It sounds like transparency. It sounds like accountability. It sounds like a promise. It is technically true, and it hides almost everything that actually matters. Because Canadian tells you where the animal was born and processed. It tells you nothing about how that beef moved from a living animal to the patty in your burger. And when you start pulling on that thread, when you look at the actual structure of McDonald's Canadian supply chain, What unravels is a picture of consolidation so extreme that a single contamination event can trigger a national food safety crisis before most Canadians even hear there's a problem. McDonald's Canada sources its beef primarily through Cargill's massive processing facility in High River, Alberta, one of the largest beef processing operations in North America. Chicken flows primarily through Maple Leaf Foods and Cargill. Produce moves through a small number of large national distributors. The entire supply chain, feeding 2.5 million daily Canadian customers, runs through a remarkably small number of choke points. This is called supply chain consolidation. And in the boardroom, it makes perfect sense. Fewer suppliers means more negotiating leverage, more consistency, lower costs, tighter logistics. It is efficient. It is profitable. It is also, from a food safety standpoint, a structure that turns localized problems into national emergencies with terrifying speed. Here's what happened when that structure failed. In 2012, XL Foods, a Cargill-owned beef processing facility in Brooks, Alberta, triggered the largest beef recall in Canadian history. Over 1,800 beef products were recalled. 18 people were confirmed sick with E. coli O157:H7. The facility's operations were suspended for weeks, while the Canadian Food Inspection Agency conducted an emergency investigation. The scale of the recall wasn't caused by widespread farm contamination. It was caused by the fact that one facility was processing beef for an enormous portion of the national supply. When contamination entered that single choke point, it spread across the country before anyone had time to contain it. According to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's official recall database, the XL Foods recall in 2012 affected products distributed to every province in Canada. McDonald's wasn't directly named in the public recall, but their primary beef supplier was at the center of the largest food safety crisis in Canadian history. That distinction matters less than you might think when you're a customer who had no idea the supply chain connecting your burger to that facility even existed. Then, a decade later, it happened again. In 2022, Maple Leaf Foods, another key McDonald's Canada supplier, issued a recall of processed meat products due to potential Listeria contamination. Listeria monocytogenes is not a minor food safety footnote. It is a bacterium that can cause severe illness and death, particularly in pregnant women, newborns, elderly Canadians, and immunocompromised individuals. The Public Health Agency of Canada maintains active surveillance on Listeria precisely because its consequences can be fatal. 2 major contamination incidents, 2 McDonald's suppliers, and most Canadians heard little to nothing about either one in the context of their daily McDonald's order. That information gap is not accidental. It is structural. Here's how it works. Large processing facilities like the ones supplying McDonald's Canada are inspected regularly by the CFIA. That part is true. But inspection reports are not automatically made public. They can be obtained through access to information requests, but they are not proactively disclosed. Recalls can occur with limited national media coverage, particularly when the affected products don't carry a brand name Canadians recognize. And supply chain relationships, which supplier provides which product to which restaurant chain, are protected as proprietary business information. So you know your beef is Canadian. You don't know it passed through a facility that was at the center of Canada's worst ever beef recall. You don't know which specific processing plant your chicken came from. You don't know the inspection history of the facilities in McDonald's supply chain. You only know the country of origin. Everything else is a trade secret. That's the supply chain story. But here's the question that follows directly from it. If McDonald's food carries these ingredient concerns, these sodium loads, and these supply chain risks, is it even saving Canadian families the money they think it is? The answer involves some arithmetic that McDonald's definitely doesn't want you to do. McDonald's versus cooking at home. The math that will make you angry. Let's do some math that McDonald's has never once encouraged you to do. A standard McDonald's family meal for 4 people, 2 Big Mac meals, 2 Happy Meals, runs you approximately $45 to $50 at current Canadian prices. That's before you add an extra drink, upgrade a size, or cave to the apple pie your kid spotted on the menu board. Call it $50 on a normal visit. Call it $55 if someone's hungry enough to add anything. It happens every time. Now walk across the street to your nearest grocery store. Ground beef, $8. Burger buns, $3. Lettuce, tomatoes, onions, $6. Frozen fries, $4. Condiments, $2. Total, $23. And unlike the McDonald's order that's gone in 15 minutes, that $23 grocery run produces 4 to 6 servings, meaning you're feeding the same family tonight and have lunch covered tomorrow. Home cooking is 50 to 60% cheaper than the equivalent McDonald's order, every single time. No exceptions, no asterisks. So, why are 2.5 million Canadians still choosing McDonald's every day? Because the math above assumes something that millions of Canadian families simply don't have: time. And time, in 2024 Canada, has become as scarce a resource as money. Consider the economic reality that sits behind that $50 McDonald's order. According to statistics, Canada's 2023 labor force survey, more than 5.5 million Canadians work multiple jobs or non-standard hours, evenings, weekends, and rotating shifts. These are not people who come home at 5:30 with energy to spare and a clear hour before dinner. These are people who finish a second shift at 7 p.m., pick up kids from a relative's place, and face the choice between a drive-through window and a 45-minute cooking session they don't have the fuel for. This is what economists call time poverty, and it is the invisible subsidy that McDonald's has been collecting from the Canadian working class for decades. The convenience premium isn't just about preference. For millions of Canadian families, it's about survival arithmetic. You spend the $50 because spending the time isn't possible tonight, and tomorrow night, and the night after that. But here's where the real betrayal lives, and it's one that McDonald's pricing strategy has made considerably worse in the last 5 years. When Canadian food inflation hit 11% in 2022, two things happened simultaneously. Grocery store prices rose sharply, making home cooking more expensive and less accessible for budget-constrained families. And McDonald's, reading that shift in real time, responded by making their value menu more prominent, their app deals more aggressive, and their combo bundles more visible. They leaned directly into the moment when home cooking became harder to afford. The result is that McDonald's is no longer competing with restaurant dining in Canada. They are competing directly with grocery stores and winning, specifically in the demographic that can least afford the health trade-off. According to Food Bank's Canada's 2024 Hunger Count report, food bank usage reached a record 2 million visits per month in 2024, a 90% increase since 2019. The Canadians walking past grocery stores because the prices feel impossible are the same Canadians for whom a $3.49 McDouble feels like the most rational available choice. And McDonald's knows this. The bigger picture: McDonald's and Canada's broken grocery and food system. McDonald's didn't break Canada's food system, but they've profited enormously from its fractures. When grocery giants like Loblaw post record profits during a cost of living crisis, when food bank usage hits 2 million monthly visits, when middle-class families are making the same impossible choices as low-income ones, fast food stops being a convenience and becomes infrastructure. McDonald's fills the void that a broken, consolidated, under-regulated Canadian food system creates. They didn't cause the problem. They just made sure they'd be the most profitable solution to it. In the end, McDonald's isn't breaking any laws. They're profiting inside regulations they helped write. You now know the ingredients, the pricing manipulation, the Quebec loophole, the supply chain risks. That knowledge is power. Share your story in the comments. What's your McDonald's order? And what did it cost you 5 years ago versus today? Will you think twice about parking in a McDonald's drive-thru after this? If this investigation opened your eyes, share it with every Canadian parent you know. And if you want us to keep digging into Canada's egg industry, grocery price fixing, and food system scandals nobody's covering, like and subscribe. This is just the beginning.